Welcome back from that short commercial break, and thank you for sticking with us. Now, today, the Permanent Secretary to the Treasury, accompanied by other stakeholders, launched the budget month for the financial year 2023-2024 at the Uganda Media Center. Jerome Paul Sonko had a sit-down with the programs coordinator at Siatini, Uganda, Ms. Penny Nambabazi, to analyze the priorities government focused on this time around. Here's a look at the exclusive.
All right, good evening and many thanks for joining us wherever you're watching Smart 24 television from Business Today. I'm Jerome Paul Sonko, and right here we've just finished the launch for the next financial year 2023-2024, and of course key discussions have as well been highlighted. And of course it's upon this same background that we want to understand a little bit more of what is in the budget and try to break it down for you and what to expect before the Minister of Finance will definitely present it in the month of June, just shortly in a few weeks to come. But of course, joining me to discuss this and more, I do have Penny Nambabazi, who is a programs coordinator, Siatini, Uganda, to take us through all this and some of the key highlights from the launch that she has been able to identify. Many thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
By the look of things, today we've launched the 2023-2024 budget month, and first and foremost, it is a program-based budget. How different is it from the previous sector-based budget?
So, government made a transition from sector budgeting to program-based. The difference here is that looking at the sectors that were there before, it's just that they have split them into a number of different programs. So while we may want to say sectors that were there before were more of focusing at a generic approach of looking at mainly how the allocations were spent, but not giving into detail to what outcomes. Now, program-based budgeting answers that. It is more focused on the outcomes that the budget should be trying to ensure that come out from each area program. So that entails having more of a depth of how many people, the numbers and the facts, to how far the budget is actually spreading down to, addressing the needs of the people, but mainly to key area outcomes and program-based budgeting per se.
Okay, that aside, you get to realize that the next budget is also having priorities set on security as a key factor. Then there's also the key aspect that the PSST has mentioned earlier in relation to putting an end or curbing corruption. When you look at some of these particular priorities, the PDM is also part of that, by the way, but when you look at these priorities, are they the right priorities, or we need to focus more on the others as well?
Well, there are a number of different areas that government has focused on. We have seen an increment on human capital development. We have seen an increment on agriculture, as well as also to tourism. Though when we look at those priorities that you also mentioned, security, and also even for works and transport, we are seeing that definitely how much has been allocated to areas such as agriculture is actually minimal. The increment is not so big, same as tourism, and this already shows that a bigger percentage is being allocated to debt, even payment of debt, even for URA that is to collect, most of it is going to actually go into paying the debt. But also when you see areas of agriculture itself, we are looking at under the theme of full monetization of the economy through agriculture, commercialization of agriculture and industrialization, and focusing also on digital transformation as well. So you get to realize we have as a theme for the budget, it is still not talking to those areas, because when you look at agriculture, the cut that they are making already, or the increment that they have made, is so minimal, but also it's also going to implicate a number of areas when it comes to how particular institutions like Ministry of Trade have kind of had a challenge on having their mandate strengthened, but also when it comes to areas such as inputs, standards. We have seen UNBS try to manage on having tests being done at the border entry points, but even of those border entry points, out of 170, only 27 border points are being staffed by UNBS to be able to carry out these tests. So the challenges that come with that is, of course, production will not be kind of added into, like there will be challenges for people to be able to have proper full products on the shelf, because you're finding there are counterfeit products still. The fees that have been put on these licenses for testing have actually been reduced, but still the businesses that are being impacted by carrying these these fees to be paid are going to have a heavy burden, because they are also trying to survive in this economy. And already agriculture is not a focus as much. Even while there's been that increment, there needs to be more emphasis on strengthening our standards, but also strengthening the institutions that have been placed to do this work, because we're still going to find we're going to be having challenges of having market access with the goods that we produce. No value is going to be added onto them, because most of the challenges businesses are facing today is that they're also trying to survive other challenges of being taxed, but also surviving to send their goods out there. So there are challenges on how best this budget is speaking to the key areas. But also when you look at the recurrent expenditure that we are seeing, more has been allocated to recurrent expenditure, payment of workers, the wage payments for even across government. That shows already that development expenditure is not really going to be increased, because most of it has been pushed onto the recurrent expenditure. But also our debt domestically has also increased. We are not only focusing now only on external, but even domestic debt. So you get to find, while we have been facing challenges of going into concessional borrowing, we have seen that there have been so many outside creditors who have come in, like China, that have also expanded external borrowing for countries like Uganda, and those that have also faced challenges out there that have been having challenges on paying this debt. It comes with some of those risks. But also we are getting to realize domestic debt itself is becoming an issue. Arrears are not also being paid on time. So it's quite a lengthy discussion on how we see this budget really. But mainly to the key areas that you should be focusing on agriculture, agro-industrialization. When it comes to focusing also on trade, we have a trade deficit. We import more than we export. So you can imagine how well we are doing when it comes to our other markets out there. We are not able to fully comply or even compete with so many products on the market. So there's a need for us to strengthen the trade arm, because when we look at trade as a sector, it encompasses so much when it comes to value addition, when it comes to competition, when it comes to market access. How best are we doing as a country to ensure that we don't have that deficit, but instead a surplus, where even trade can contribute to the economy and the growth of a number of different areas.
Okay, now let's also focus on the night economy. There's something that has been mentioned about the night economy and how much we really need to regulate it, because it does seem like it is contributing greatly to the GDP as much as the day economy, and of course it's employing quite a number of Ugandans, more so in the informal sector. Should it be something to ponder on in the next financial year?
For the night economy, of course, the private sector is a huge it's actually a very strong arm to development. Even economic growth, as you've mentioned, to the GDP, how we see businesses have been surviving through from COVID. The transformation that was really made was that businesses have had to find ways of managing and surviving. And for the night economy, being that the report that showed that Uganda is being ranked #1 is one of the things that I think could come back to us is how best are we also being able to support these businesses as a government to see to it that they're able to even strengthen where they could be facing challenges. You find maybe a business could have decided to try to go into a number of different areas of work or doing its operations, but they're focused on night because they think that is more for them, the income they're able to generate. But you get to realize they're also having challenges that we need to see government come in and support the private sector, but also even the small and medium enterprises, because most of them you find are doing this kind of more of night emphasis to broaden out their way of doing business, but you find they're challenged also to how best they're able to even channel out or even add more value to how they are growing as a business. So there is need for government to intervene, but even from the past is that while there has been taxes on such areas of business, like for example alcohol, there was an increment that was made even over time, but at that time also it kind of contradicts how we want to also shape the private sector development and growth. So it's one of the things that we need to see, how does government come in to support these businesses to kind of thrive even during the day. It's not particular to say that they're only for the night. I find that there are such businesses that could do better strengthening their business to go across a number of different elements, not just the night side of it. So there's need for government to come in and strengthen that and support businesses.
Okay, then now lastly, my other concern is the public debt. It is increasing, and by the look of things here, you get to realize that according to the next financial year, we have budget cuts, and so we are cutting expenses, we are limiting more of these expenditures, more so in public service as well. But then even with the 52.7 trillion budget, we do not have that current money to fund the budget. So which means we have to go on to borrow again. So how are we then going to be cutting on our expense? How are we then going to be cutting or decreasing on this public debt, and what should be done really?
Of course, given the fact that I mentioned earlier, domestic debt is also rising, and so is external. We need to, as government needs to be able to pay the private sector, because most of those areas that have been pending payment are really the private sector. Even the growth to how government is able to also create an environment, a stable environment, where they ensure that they are not competing with the private sector when it comes to business, and also accessing credit. So there are ways that need to be focused on ways that we can kind of cut down even on our expenditure, because we have a lot of recurrent expenditure. There have been areas where government tried to cut on workshops. The same needs to be done, but also strengthen on having more emphasis for different ministries or departments to also look at reducing their expenditures generally across all different agencies, and also seeing to it that we're able to ensure that we are sustainable in the ways that we borrow, because we tend to also look at areas where we are getting money more easily, like the non-concessional, but we may have to look at also concessional borrowing to be strengthened more and see to it that we lessen on the burden of taxpayers, but also increase on how we do generate more options or alternatives for government to get money, aside even burdening the taxpayer.
Many thanks for your time and for this wonderful conversation. And that is Miss Penina Mbabazi, who is the programs coordinator Siatini, Uganda. And of course, the countdown for National Budget 2023-2024 kicks off today after that particular launch that has just happened. So be sure to catch up every little detail on Smart 24 television.
Thank you so much, John Paul Sonko, for that insightful conversation together with Penny Nambabas from Siatini, Uganda. I think it is imperative for the government and other concerned stakeholders to realize that this different budget, the program-based budget, different from the sector-based budget, is a benchmark for the sectors, especially the private sectors, to be able to grow and enable the taxpayers' burden be reduced. That's all we had for you in Business Today. As always, thank you for the pleasure of your time. If you miss any of these stories, you could watch on our YouTube channel at Smart24 TV Live, or follow on our social media platforms at Smart24 TV, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and the like. And be sure to follow or watch Smart24 TV still for any business-related information within the region. My name is Rona Nahabwe with Winnie Weyins and Nakauch and the sign language interpretation. Have a good night.
Smart 24, driving business.